Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I've been carrying this decision in my heart for quite some time. And honestly, it has been one of the most unexpected but transformative chapters of my life. Most people know me for the music, the performances, the endless energy on stage, the passion I pour into every project with BTS, and the countless commitments that come along with living in the public eye. But behind all of that, beyond the lights, the applause, the sold-out stadiums, there is a version of me that had to come to terms with something I never thought I would confront so early in my life. What it really means to hold on to possessions and what it truly means to let them go. When I got married, everything in my life seemed to shift at once. The people around me, the expectations from the world, and even the way I viewed my own future. Suddenly, every gift, every house, every collection I had built over the years felt heavier than before. Fans and the media assumed marriage would mean expanding life, adding more, building bigger. But for me, it triggered the exact opposite. It forced me to question what I really needed, what I really valued, and what kind of life I wanted to build with the person I love most. Most people were shocked when they first heard whispers that I was planning to sell almost all of my belongings. Some thought it was a rumor meant to stir drama. Others speculated it was because of financial management, a publicity stunt, or maybe even an obsession with minimalism. But the truth is far more personal, far more intimate, and in many ways, far more liberating than any of those theories. It all began during a particularly intense stretch of work. Anyone who has followed my career knows that my schedule has often been overwhelming, sometimes bordering on unbearable. Rehearsals through the night, recordings that stretched into the dawn, flights across continents with barely a moment to catch my breath. At one point, I was moving so fast that my days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. When I finally returned to the massive house I had once dreamed about, thousands of square feet of polished design and luxury, it should have felt like peace. It should have felt like comfort, safety, the reward of hard work. But that night, for the first time, I felt something different. I felt suffocated. I walked through room after room, each one echoing with silence, decorated with furniture and art I had carefully selected but hardly noticed anymore. There were rooms I had never even stepped into after they were completed. Closets filled with clothes that had never been worn, shoes lined up like trophies, gifts still wrapped from fans and friends, sitting untouched on shelves. I had 7 bedrooms, but I only ever needed one. I had 5 bathrooms, when one was enough. A dining room that could seat 20, yet most nights I ate quickly and alone or on the road with takeout containers. And so the question formed quietly in my mind, what is all of this really doing for me? Not what does it look like to the outside world, not how much it would sell for if I calculated the numbers, but what true value was it adding to my daily existence? For the first time in years, I could not answer that question with honesty. In that silence, I remembered the words of my grandmother. She used to tell me, the more things you own, the less space you have in your heart for the things that matter. When I was younger, I never understood what she meant. At the time, owning more seemed like proof of growth, of success, of making my family proud. But standing in that grand house, with everything I had once wanted within reach, her words came rushing back with a weight I could not ignore. That night, I sat down at a table, one of those massive dining tables made from custom wood, imported from another country, designed to impress. And as I traced a grain of the wood with my hand, I realized something startling. Every single item around me carried a responsibility. The furniture needed care, the cars needed maintenance, the clothes demanded storage and attention. The houses required cleaning, repairs, taxes, insurance, security. Even the gifts that had been given with love had become obligations in disguise, filling shelves and corners, whispering to me that I needed to keep them safe, preserve them, remember them. It was a quiet but undeniable truth. Every possession I had was not just something I owned, it was something that also owned me. And when I thought about my marriage, about the life I was now building with another soul, it hit me harder. Was this the environment I wanted to bring into our new life together? Did I want to carry these invisible chains, these endless responsibilities that drained time, energy, focus, into a future that was supposed to be about freedom, love, and shared experiences. I decided in that moment that I couldn't. So I began the process of questioning every item in my life. I asked myself, if I didn't already own this, would I choose to bring it into my life today? It was a brutal test. And for almost everything I looked at, cars, clothes, art, electronics, even sentimental trinkets, the answer was no. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the beauty of those things or the memories attached to them, but they no longer matched the person I was becoming. They no longer matched the life I wanted to create with my partner. The irony is that these belongings had once symbolized success. They had once given me a sense of achievement, proof that I had reached a certain level in life, in my career, in my journey. But now, they had become heavy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I really valued wasn't any of these objects. What I valued was freedom. Freedom to focus on the music and the people who inspire me. Freedom to spend real, uninterrupted time with my wife, with my family, with my closest friends. Freedom to move, to breathe, to create, without feeling like every step came with the burden of possessions clinging to me like shadows. And so, as radical as it sounded to everyone else, to me the decision became clear. I would sell everything that no longer truly served me. I would keep only what was essential, only what added genuine value to my life. Not because I couldn't afford these things anymore, but because I couldn't afford what they were costing me in freedom, in clarity, and in peace of mind. When I first shared this decision, the reactions were explosive. Some people thought I was breaking down, that marriage had pushed me into some strange crisis. Others thought it was a stunt, a way to get attention. A few even believed I was preparing to disappear from the public eye. But the truth was much simpler. I had chosen alignment over excess. The process was not easy. Walking through those houses, choosing what to keep and what to let go, facing memories tied to objects, it was emotional in ways I hadn't expected. I would hold a jacket I wore during a legendary concert and feel the rush of the crowd all over again. I would glance at a watch gifted by someone important in my career and feel the weight of gratitude mixed with guilt for even considering parting with it. And yet, with each item I released, I felt something even stronger. Relief. It was as if I could breathe more deeply, as if I could stand taller. The empty spaces in my home were no longer voids, they were freedom. Every time a room cleared out, I felt lighter. Every time an object was sold, donated, or gifted, I felt closer to the life I wanted to live. I wasn't erasing my past. I wasn't rejecting the journey that brought me here. I was simply creating space for the future, for love, for creation, for connection. And in that space, I found a clarity I'd been missing for years. This was the beginning of the journey, the beginning of understanding that possessions are not just things, they are choices, responsibilities, weights. And sometimes, the bravest choice we can make is to let them go. The weekend after I made that initial decision, I didn't run off to the studio or book a sudden flight overseas. For one of the first times in years, I stayed home. And not just to rest, but to confront the reality I had been avoiding for far too long. I began walking from room to room with a notebook in my hand, writing down every single item I saw, every table, every chair, every framed picture, every guitar I hadn't touched in months, every box of unopened gifts. At first, it felt overwhelming. How could I even begin to sort through years of accumulation? But I told myself the truth. I had built this collection not because each thing improved my life, but because somewhere along the way, I had adopted the belief that success was measured by what you owned, not by how freely you lived. And if I had fallen into that trap, then the only way out was to face it directly. So I asked myself the question again and again. If I didn't already own this, would I choose to bring it into my life today? The answer, more often than not, was no. There was the row of luxury jackets in my closet, beautiful pieces from designers I admired, given as gifts or bought in moments of excitement. I had worn some of them once, others never at all. But when I stood there staring at them, I realized they didn't represent me anymore. They represented a version of me who thought he needed to prove something to the world. A version of me who thought material weight equaled personal worth. I let them go. There was the massive dining room table that could seat 20. For years, it had been the centerpiece of my house. Yet I could count on one hand the number of times it had been used for meals with friends or family. The truth was, my real moments of connection happened in smaller settings, cramped kitchens, or late night takeout on the floor. That table didn't represent warmth or love. It represented absence. I let it go. There were boxes of gifts from fans, unopened and carefully stacked in storage rooms. For a long time, I held on to them out of guilt, out of the belief that I needed to preserve every single item to honor the love that was given to me. But when I opened those boxes and really looked at them, I realized something deeper. The gifts were symbols of the connection I already carried in my heart. They were never meant to become anchors weighing me down. The fans gave them with joy, not with the intention of chaining me to endless storage. So, with gratitude, I let them go. Piece by piece, the rooms began to empty. The walls that had once been crowded with art and decorations became blank canvases. The closets that had once been stuffed to bursting began to breathe again. With each item removed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years' space. But more than the physical space, it was the psychological space that mattered most. Because every item I sold, donated, or gave away carried with it a small claim on my attention. And without those claims, I began to notice something extraordinary. My mind was quieter. For the first time, I wasn't waking up thinking about repairs, maintenance, storage, or security. I wasn't calculating costs in my head or worrying about things breaking or going missing. I was just present. And that presence became the foundation for something more important than anything I had owned before. Marriage is about partnership, about building a shared life. And as I sat with my wife in those newly cleared rooms, I realized what I wanted wasn't to fill them again with things. What I wanted was to fill them with time, with laughter, with memories, with freedom. Freedom had become the word that echoed through everything I was doing. Because the truth is, possessions often disguise themselves as freedom. We tell ourselves that having a bigger house means more space to live, that having more clothes means more options to express ourselves, that having more cars means more ways to move through the world. But in reality, each possession adds a chain, a tether, a responsibility that quietly steals time and energy. I saw it clearly in the simplest of ways. Take my collection of watches. I had gathered some of the rarest, most expensive pieces in the world, watches that cost more than some families earn in a year. They were supposed to be treasures, symbols of success, markers of moments I should have been proud of. Yet one day, while sorting through storage, I found one of those watches in a box, untouched for years. I had forgotten it even existed. Holding it in my hand, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. How could something I once considered so valuable disappear so easily from my life? If it had truly mattered, wouldn't I have remembered it? Worn it? Cherished it? The truth was simple. It had not added any value to my life for years. Instead, it had only been another object demanding care, insurance, protection, another quiet weight. So I gave it away, and to my surprise, giving it away brought me more joy than owning it ever did. Because in that moment, I realized value doesn't come from possession. It comes from experience, from sharing, from the freedom to let go. People on the outside couldn't understand. They assumed I was going through some kind of breakdown or that my marriage had changed me in strange, unpredictable ways. But the truth was, I was finally waking up. I was finally realizing that true success wasn't about what I owned. It was about what I could release. When I shared my perspective publicly, the reactions were fascinating. Some called it foolish. Some said I was ungrateful. But there were also people, quiet voices among the noise, who said they understood. Who said they, too, had felt the suffocation of possessions. Who said they had dreamed of letting go but were too afraid to take the first step. To those people, I say this: letting go is not loss, it is liberation. Because when you strip away the unnecessary, what remains becomes sharper, clearer, more beautiful. When you stop filling your days with the maintenance of objects, you begin to fill them with the presence of life itself. That's what I was beginning to see. That's what marriage had revealed to me in a way nothing else could. Because when you stand before another person and vow to share your life, you can't hide behind things anymore. You can't cover emptiness with possessions. You have to face who you really are and decide what you're really carrying into that partnership. And for me, The answer was simple. I wanted to carry freedom. Freedom to love without distraction. Freedom to create without clutter. Freedom to live lightly, deeply, intentionally. That is why I chose to sell my belongings. Not because I was losing something, but because I was gaining everything that truly mattered. The first few weeks after the decision were strange, almost unsettling. Rooms that had once been crowded with furniture now echoed with silence. Walls that had been decorated with paintings and photographs now stood bare, waiting. Closets that once bulged with clothes now hung nearly empty. A few carefully chosen pieces left behind. At night, I would walk through the house and feel the emptiness pressing in. At first, I wondered if I had made a mistake. After all, these possessions had been with me for years, shaping the environment I had lived in, forming the backdrop of countless memories. Letting them go felt, at times, like erasing part of myself. But then something happened. One evening, I sat down in what used to be the living room. The giant sofa that once dominated the space was gone. The shelves were empty. There was no massive television, no speakers, no clutter of decorations. Just me, sitting on the floor with a single cushion and a small lamp in the corner. And for the first time, I could hear the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of peace. My mind, which had been carrying the weight of so many objects, so many unspoken responsibilities, began to relax. The constant hum of distraction faded away. In that quiet, I could actually breathe. It was a revelation. I realized that possessions create a kind of background noise in our lives. Each object carries a memory, a responsibility, an invisible tether that ties us to the past or the future. And when you surround yourself with too many of those tethers, you begin to drown in them. You lose sight of the present moment. You lose sight of yourself. By clearing the rooms, I had unknowingly cleared my mind. This clarity began to seep into every part of my life. In my music, I found myself writing differently. Lyrics flowed more naturally, unburdened by the need to impress or prove something. My melodies felt lighter, freer, more honest. I wasn't creating from a place of pressure. I was creating from a place of truth. In my marriage, the shift was even more profound. Before, I often came home exhausted, weighed down not just by work, but by the endless demands of maintaining the life I had built. Even when I was physically present, my mind was elsewhere, thinking about repairs, renovations, purchases, or the endless logistics of managing multiple homes. But now, when I came home, I was truly there, fully present. There were no distractions pulling me away, no possessions whispering for attention. It was just us. Conversations flowed more deeply. Laughter came more easily. Time stretched out, unhurried and uncluttered. It struck me then, possessions had not only taken up physical space in my life, but emotional space as well. They had been standing between me and the people I loved. By letting them go, I wasn't just simplifying my environment, I was making room for deeper connection. Of course, it wasn't all smooth. There were moments of doubt, especially when selling items that once felt irreplaceable. My first car, for example. It wasn't just metal and wheels, it was a symbol of independence, of freedom, of youth. Handing over those keys felt like saying goodbye to a younger version of myself. But as the buyer drove away, I stood there with an unexpected feeling, not sadness, but relief. The car had served its purpose. It had carried me through important chapters of my life, but I no longer needed it. Letting it go allowed me to honor those memories without being tied down by them. This pattern repeated itself again and again. Each time I released something, I discovered that the memories remained. They weren't stored in the objects, they were stored in me. And that realization became a kind of liberation. I remember one night when my wife and I sat together in one of the nearly empty rooms. She asked me if I missed any of it. The art, the clothes, the furniture, the endless collections. I thought about it carefully, and then I shook my head. No, I said, I don't miss the things. I just feel lighter. She smiled, and in that moment I realized something crucial. Life isn't measured by what fills your shelves, but by what fills your heart. The media didn't understand. Articles speculated endlessly. Was this about money? About pressure from the marriage? About some strange new philosophy I had adopted? They painted it as a crisis, a scandal, an eccentric stunt. But what they didn't see was the simplicity of it. I wasn't breaking down. I was breaking free. And the more I embraced that freedom, the more I began to see its ripple effects. My schedule, once jam-packed with obligations, began to feel more manageable. Without the burden of maintaining possessions, I had hours of free time I hadn't even realized I was losing. I could spend them writing, exercising, or simply walking outside. Time that had once been stolen by my belongings was now mine again. It made me think about how many people live in a kind of hidden time poverty. Not because they lack hours in the day, but because those hours are consumed by maintaining things that don't actually matter. Cleaning, organizing, repairing, worrying. We tell ourselves it's normal, that it's just part of life. But what if it doesn't have to be? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Possessions often promise freedom, but in reality, they restrict it. They tie you down, slow you down, weigh you down. True freedom doesn't come from owning everything you want, it comes from needing less. This shift changed the way I approached not just my personal life, but my career as well. I stopped thinking about growth in terms of accumulation, more shows, more deals, more obligations. Instead, I started thinking in terms of alignment. What projects truly resonated with me? What experiences genuinely added value to my life? What could I release so I could focus more deeply on what really mattered? That clarity has been one of the greatest gifts of this journey. And it all began with the courage to let go. I sometimes think back to the view from one of the houses I sold. It was breathtaking mountains in the distance, the city glowing at night, the kind of view people spend fortunes to own. For years, I told myself I couldn't live without it. But standing there for the last time, I realized something profound. The beauty of that view didn't come from owning it. It came from experiencing it. And experiences, unlike possessions, are limitless. You can find beauty anywhere if you're open to it. You don't need to own the mountains to admire them. You don't need to buy the city to feel its energy. You don't need to collect sunsets to enjoy their light. That realization has stayed with me ever since. Ownership and experience are not the same thing. And once you understand that, you begin to live differently. You begin to live more freely. So when people ask me now why I sold everything, my answer is simple. Because I chose freedom over possessions. Because I chose clarity over clutter. Because I chose love, creativity, and presence over objects that had long stopped serving me. And if I could go back, if I could speak to my younger self, I would tell him this. Success isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by how lightly you can walk through life, how present you can be with the people you love, and how free you are to pursue what truly matters. The further I went into this journey, the more I began to question what wealth really meant. For most of my life, wealth had been defined for me by the outside world numbers. In a bank account, the size of a house, the brand of clothes, the exclusivity of possessions. These were the markers everyone seemed to agree on, and I accepted them without much thought. After all, that was the narrative of success. Work hard, achieve more, buy more, display more. But standing in my nearly empty home, free from the endless maintenance and the suffocating weight of ownership, I began to see a different picture. Wealth, I realized, was not about how much you could acquire. It was about how little you truly needed to live fully, freely, and with peace in your heart. This shift felt radical, almost rebellious, especially in a world that constantly tells us to want more. Every advertisement whispers that happiness is just one purchase away. Every headline celebrates net worth as if it were the ultimate measure of a person's life. Even in the music industry, success is often showcased through possessions, the cars, the clothes, the endless luxury. But I had lived that life. I had owned the houses, the cars, the closets full of designer pieces. And instead of joy, I had found noise. Instead of freedom, I had found chains. Now, living with less, I was experiencing something new, clarity. It was as if a fog had lifted. Decisions came more easily. Priorities stood out more sharply. I no longer wasted energy managing things that didn't matter. And in that space, I could pour myself fully into what did matter: my music, my marriage, my health, my growth as a person. The media, of course, tried to spin it differently. Headlines painted me as unstable, eccentric, even reckless. Why would Jungkook give up the symbols of his success, they asked. Was he pressured into this by marriage? Was it a stunt to stay relevant? The theories piled up endlessly. But what none of them understood was that this wasn't a loss, it was a liberation. Letting go of possessions didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger. It sharpened my focus, renewed my creativity, and gave me back something far more valuable than luxury ever could. Time. Time to write. Time to breathe. Time to be with the people I loved without distraction. One of the most profound realizations came when I thought about my work. Many assumed that by selling my homes and simplifying my life, I was stepping away from my career, maybe even preparing for an early exit. But the reality was the exact opposite. By stripping away the excess, I had created space for deeper commitment. With fewer distractions, I found myself pouring into music with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Songs came to me not as obligations, but as gifts. Performances felt less like routines and more like sacred exchanges of energy. The art was no longer drowned out by the weight of possessions. It was amplified by the simplicity of my life. I also noticed something unexpected. I began enjoying the few things I did keep more than ever before. A simple guitar, one I had played since my teenage years, suddenly felt priceless. Every note carried weight, every strum felt alive. A pair of shoes I wore daily became more meaningful than the dozens that had once sat untouched in my closet. When you have less, you notice more. When you strip away the unnecessary, what remains shines brighter. This journey also forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about why I had accumulated so much in the first place. If I was honest with myself, many of those purchases had been made unconsciously driven by the image I thought I needed to project. A luxury watch because that's what someone in my position should wear. A sprawling house because that's what success is supposed to look like. Designer clothes because they told the world I belonged on that stage, in that spotlight. But none of those things had made me feel more whole. They had only distracted me from the real work of becoming myself. Marriage changed everything. It forced me to ask, what do I want to carry into this new life, this shared life? Do I want to bring along the noise, the clutter, the endless obligations? Or do I want to bring presence, love, freedom? The answer was obvious. So I let go. Fans were divided when they heard about my decision. Some were supportive, understanding the deeper meaning behind it. Others were worried, afraid that this meant I was distancing myself from them or from the life I had built. But the truth is, this journey was not about turning away from people. It was about turning more fully toward them. By releasing possessions, I was able to give more of myself, more honesty in my music, more presence in my performances, more openness in my personal life. I thought often about something my grandfather once told me. The more things you hold, the less space you have for people. At the time, I didn't fully understand. But now, living with less, I see it clearly. Possessions can crowd out the very relationships that make life meaningful. When you stop carrying so many things, you finally have room to carry love. This redefinition of wealth extended into every part of my life. I no longer measured myself by what I owned, but by what I could live without. True wealth, I realized, wasn't about being able to buy everything. It was about being free from the need to. And that freedom became the foundation of everything else. When I looked back at my old life, the mansions, the collections, the endless possessions, I didn't feel regret. I felt as though I had been under a spell, believing I needed all of that to be happy or successful. The truth was the opposite. What I needed was to be unburdened. What I needed was clarity. There was one particular memory that crystallized this shift for me. I had once stood on the terrace of a house overlooking the city, convinced I could never give up that view. But the day I saw the house, standing there one last time, I realized the joy of that view had never come from owning it. It came from experiencing it. And I could experience beauty anywhere without the chains of ownership. That realization was liberating beyond words. Ownership and experience are not the same. And when you stop confusing them, you begin to live differently. You begin to live more fully. So when people ask me now why I sold all my belongings after getting married, I tell them the truth. Because marriage taught me what truly matters. And it wasn't the houses or the cars or the closets. It was love, freedom, clarity, and presence. Those are the possessions I want to carry with me. And they weigh nothing at all. There was one night that has stayed with me more vividly than almost any other during this journey. It was about a month after I had already sold most of my larger possessions, the houses, the cars, the extra collections. I was going through boxes in storage, sorting out what remained when I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a watch. Not just any watch, but one of the most expensive pieces I had ever owned. At the time I bought it, I remember the excitement, the thrill of finally being able to afford something so rare, so exclusive, so carefully crafted. I told myself it was a symbol of how far I had come, proof that the boy who once dreamed of making music in a small room had now reached a place where he could have anything. And yet, there it was, buried in a box, forgotten, untouched for more than 2 years. I held it in my hands and felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pride, because it reminded me of the journey. Shame, because I had once placed so much meaning in something so trivial. Sadness, because I realized how easily I had been distracted by the illusion of success. But mostly, I felt emptiness. Because what value had it really added to my life? Did it make me love more deeply? Did it make my music more meaningful? Did it make my marriage stronger, my friendships truer, my soul lighter? No. It had only sat there, demanding to be insured, demanding to be protected, demanding to be remembered. It had taken far more than it had ever given. And in that moment, the decision became easy. I gave it away. I can still remember the face of the person who received it. They looked at the watch the way I had once looked at it, with excitement, with wonder, with a sense that it was something extraordinary. And maybe for them it would be. Maybe it would mark a chapter in their life. Maybe it would hold meaning I could no longer find in it. As for me, the act of giving it away brought me more joy than owning it ever had. Because in that act, I understood something profound. Possessions only have meaning if they align with the life you're truly living. If they don't, they become burdens disguised as treasures. This moment with the watch became a kind of symbol for the entire journey. It showed me how easily we confuse acquiring with experiencing, how quickly we mistake having for enjoying. The watch hadn't added to my life in years, but the freedom I felt in releasing it, that was real, that was lasting. From then on, I began to see every item in my life through this lens. Did it add to my presence? Did it deepen my connections? Did it inspire my creativity? If not, I let it go. The surprising part was that with every release, I felt more alive. My days no longer revolved around managing things. Instead, they revolved around living. Writing songs, sharing meals, walking in the park, holding hands with my wife, laughing with friends, breathing in the quiet of a morning, without endless obligations tugging at me. I began to sleep better. Not because I had bought a new bed, but because my mind was unburdened. I began to write more. Not because I had acquired new tools, but because my spirit was lighter. I began to enjoy even the smallest things more deeply. The taste of a simple meal, the comfort of a single well-loved chair, the sunlight spilling through an uncluttered window. This journey also made me think differently about time. I realized how much of my life had been spent managing, maintaining, cleaning, ensuring, worrying about possessions, hours each week, stolen silently, disguised as normal routine. But once those things were gone, those hours came rushing back to me. And with them, I discovered a hidden wealth I had never known before. Time. Time to rest, time to create, time to be present, time to love. I started to ask myself questions I had never considered. How many people in this world live in quiet time poverty? Not because they lack hours in the day, but because those hours are consumed by things that don't truly matter. How many of us mistake ownership for fulfillment, while our lives slip past in the upkeep of things that add nothing to our souls? The more I thought about it, the more I knew I didn't want to live like that anymore. Fans often ask me now, do you regret it? Do you regret letting go of things you worked so hard for? And my answer is always the same, no, because the truth is, those things were never the reward. The real reward was the freedom I found when I released them. Happiness didn't come from holding on. It came from letting go. I remember sitting with my wife one evening after another long day of clearing and donating. The house was nearly empty by then, stripped down to its essentials. We sat on the floor with takeout boxes, eating simply, laughing about how bare the place looked. And I realized something beautiful. Even in that emptiness, maybe especially in that emptiness, we were full of presence, full of connection, full of the freedom to shape our lives intentionally. That night, I whispered to her, "This is enough." And I meant it with every part of me. Because enough is not found in abundance. Enough is found in alignment. Enough is when what surrounds you matches what you truly value. Enough is when your life reflects your heart, not the world's expectations. And I had finally found mine. When I began to live with less, I expected it to affect my daily routines, my home life, maybe even my state of mind. What I didn't fully anticipate was how deeply it would transform my art, my music, my performances, and the way I approach my career itself. For years, I had been living in a cycle of constant output. Studio sessions that blurred into rehearsals, rehearsals that blurred into tours, tours that blurred into promotions. My calendar was so packed that sometimes I felt like I was running on autopilot, moving from one obligation to the next. The possessions I had accumulated only reinforced that feeling. They seemed to say, "This is the reward. This is the proof that all the work is worth it." But after selling everything, after stripping my life down to the essentials, I saw it differently. I realized the real reward had never been the houses or the cars or the closets. It had always been the music itself. The connection with fans, the act of creation, the nights on stage when the lights went out and the crowd sang louder than me. Those were the moments that mattered, and none of them depended on what I owned. This clarity began to change the way I wrote. Songs that once felt like assignments now felt like conversations. Lyrics that once had to meet deadlines now came from a place of truth. The pressure didn't disappear. I still worked hard. I still pushed myself, but the energy was different. It was no longer driven by the need to maintain an image. It was driven by love. One afternoon, I sat in the studio with nothing but my guitar. No expensive equipment, no massive racks of gear, no clutter of technology, just the guitar and my voice. And in that simplicity, something unlocked. The melody that came to me that day was raw, unpolished, but it carried more honesty than anything I had written in years. That moment showed me something vital. Art doesn't need excess, it needs presence. The same was true in performance. Before, I often worried about appearances, what outfit I was wearing, how the stage design looked, whether the production matched the expectations of success. But after simplifying my life, I stepped on stage with a different mindset. I wasn't performing to prove anything anymore. I was performing to connect, to give, to share a piece of my soul with people who had given me so much of theirs. And strangely, by focusing less on appearances, I found myself more present than ever. The stage lights felt warmer, the music hit deeper, the connection with the audience felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced since the earliest days. Marriage amplified this transformation. My wife reminded me daily that love is not measured in things, but in presence. That the moments we share, not the possessions we hold, are what truly define a life. Her grounding presence helped me see that the same principle applied to my career. Music wasn't about how much I could produce, but how deeply it resonated. Fans noticed the change. They told me my performances felt more personal, my lyrics more vulnerable, my presence more open. And they were right, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't weighed down by possessions or the endless cycle of acquiring and maintaining. I was free to give my whole self to the art. This experience also changed the way I thought about the future. Before, I imagined success as an upward climb, more shows, more records, more awards, more everything. But now, I realized success wasn't about more. It was about deeper connections, deeper honesty, deeper purpose. It also made me reconsider what kind of legacy I wanted to leave. Did I want to be remembered for the houses I owned, the cars I drove, the clothes I wore? Or did I want to be remembered for the songs that touched people's hearts, the performances that gave people strength, the love I shared openly? The answer was obvious. And so my focus shifted. Instead of chasing every opportunity, I became selective. I asked myself, does this project align with who I am? Does it bring value to my life and to others? Does it reflect the freedom and clarity I found? If the answer was no, I let it go. This was not easy. In an industry that thrives on more, saying no can feel like sabotage. But I realized that every no created space for a better yes. By releasing projects that didn't align, I created room for those that truly mattered. The same principle applied to how I managed my schedule. Before, my days were filled with obligations I barely remembered agreeing to. Now, I cut ruthlessly. I chose fewer commitments, but I poured myself fully into each one. The quality of my work rose, not because I was working harder, but because I was working clearer. I started to think of simplicity, not just as a lifestyle choice, but as a professional advantage. When your life is cluttered with possessions and obligations, your mind is scattered. But when you strip it down, focus sharpens. Ideas flow more easily. Creativity flourishes. Decisions become clearer. This shift also opened a new question. What else in my life had I accepted without thinking? If I had been wrong about needing all those possessions, what other assumptions had I absorbed without question? That question became a kind of compass. I started examining everything: how I structured my time, how I approached relationships, how I defined success. And in each area, I found defaults I no longer wanted to accept. For example, I once believed that more work always meant more progress. But now I saw that rest, reflection, and presence were just as vital to growth as endless output. I once believed that image was everything, but now I saw that authenticity was far more powerful. I once believed that possessions measured worth, but now I saw that freedom measured wealth. This wasn't just a change in lifestyle, it was a change in identity. I wasn't the man defined by what he owned, I was the man defined by what he chose to let go. And in letting go, I found myself again. So when people ask me now about my decision, why I sold all my belongings after getting married, I tell them this: because marriage taught me to live for what matters. Because possessions had distracted me from my art, my relationships, my freedom. And because in choosing less, I found more than I ever imagined. More love, more clarity, more truth. And that, to me, is wealth. As the days turned into months and my life grew lighter with every possession I released, I found myself thinking often about the people who had shaped me long before success, long before the music industry, long before the world knew my name. My family, my parents, my grandparents. There was a wisdom in them, a quiet strength that I had once overlooked in my rush to achieve. When I was younger, my grandmother would tell me stories of how she and my grandfather lived through times when resources were scarce. They didn't buy things for the sake of buying them. They valued every object that entered their home, not because it was expensive, but because it served a purpose. A chair wasn't just furniture. It was a place where stories were told, where family gathered, where warmth was shared. I remember visiting her small home as a child. Nothing about it was grand. The furniture was simple, the decorations modest, the space humble, yet there was a sense of fullness there, a richness that had nothing to do with money. Every corner carried memory. Every item had meaning. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was unnecessary. At the time, I didn't understand it. I thought happiness came from having more, from surrounding yourself with the newest, the shiniest, the most impressive. I thought the size of your possessions reflected the size of your success. But now, years later, standing in my own emptying house, I finally understood what my grandmother had always tried to teach me. True wealth is not measured by accumulation. It is measured by appreciation. My father, too, carried this lesson in his own way. He would often say, "Don't let the things you own decide the kind of man you are." When I was younger, I brushed it off. But now, I see how prophetic those words were. For a long time, I had let possessions define me. The brands I wore, the cars I drove, the houses I lived in, they all became part of my identity. And yet, none of them captured who I truly was. It took marriage and the conscious act of letting go for me to rediscover that truth. One evening, I sat with my wife, telling her about my grandmother's words. She listened carefully, then smiled and said, "Maybe this is your way of honoring them. Maybe by letting go, you're carrying forward their wisdom." That thought stayed with me, because in many ways she was right. This journey wasn't just about me. It was about remembering where I came from. It was about carrying forward a legacy of simplicity, humility, and gratitude in a world that constantly demands more. There's a photo of my grandparents that I keep close. In it, they're standing outside their home, smiling at the camera. Their clothes are simple, their house small, but their expressions radiate a joy I once thought could only come from having more. Now I know better. That joy came from being unburdened, from needing little, from valuing love over possessions. When I think about them, I realize how much of my own struggle came from forgetting their lessons. Success had drowned out their wisdom for a while, but life has a way of bringing you back. And now, as I live with less, I feel closer to them than ever. I see it too in the way my parents raised me. They didn't have much when they were younger, but they gave me everything that mattered: love, encouragement, guidance. They sacrificed so that I could chase my dreams. And when I succeeded, I thought the best way to honor them was by building bigger, buying more, showing the world how far I had come. But now I realize the greatest way to honor them is to live by the values they instilled in me, to choose presence over possessions, to choose freedom over excess, to choose gratitude over greed. Marriage has only deepened this realization. Because when you share your life with someone, you begin to see more clearly what really matters. It's not the size of the house, but the love within it. It's not the cost of the gifts, but the thought behind them. It's not the abundance of things, but the abundance of time, laughter, and shared dreams. That's the legacy I want to carry forward. That's the inheritance I want to pass on. Not collections of objects, but collections of values. Sometimes I imagine the future. Maybe one day I'll have children of my own. And when they ask me what it means to be successful, I don't want to point to a garage filled with cars or a mansion filled with rooms no one uses. I want to tell them about freedom, about love, about the importance of keeping life simple so you can focus on what truly matters. I want to tell them what my grandparents told me, that the more things you own, the more they own you. And I want them to see, not just in my words, but in my life, that this is true. So when people ask why I sold all my belongings after getting married, part of the answer is this: because I wanted to return to the wisdom that raised me, because I wanted to honor the lessons of my family, because I wanted to prove to myself and to the next generation that happiness is not found in excess, but in enough. And enough is a beautiful place to be. There's a memory that stands out more than most during this entire journey, a moment that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. It happened when I sold the house that, for years, I had called my main home. It wasn't just any house, it was massive, with high ceilings, walls of glass, rooms that seemed endless. A place designed to impress, to scream success. I remember the first time I stepped inside after buying it, I thought I had arrived. That this was proof that everything I had worked for, all the late nights and exhausting tours, had been worth it. This house was the symbol that I had made it. But years later, when the rooms were empty and I walked through it one final time, I felt something very different. I remember stepping onto the terrace. From there, I could see the city stretched out beneath me, lights twinkling like stars, mountains silhouetted in the distance. It was the kind of view people dream about, the kind of view I once believed I couldn't live without. For so long, I told myself that this was happiness, that owning this view meant I had conquered something. But standing there in silence, I realized the truth. The joy of that view had never come from owning it. It had always come from experiencing it. And experiences, unlike possessions, can be found anywhere. I didn't need to pay millions to look at a sunset. I didn't need a sprawling property to feel the wind on my face. I didn't need glass walls to remind me that beauty exists beyond them. Beauty is everywhere for free, for anyone willing to notice it. That realization struck me with such clarity that I almost laughed out loud. For years, I had chained myself to this house, to the maintenance it demanded, to the image it represented, believing it gave me happiness. But the truth was, it had only given me responsibility. And now, by letting it go, I was free to experience beauty without the burden of ownership. As I stood there for the last time, I whispered goodbye, not with sadness, but with gratitude. That house had been part of my journey. It had given me shelter. It had seen both lonely nights and moments of triumph, but it was no longer what I needed. And walking away from it, I felt lighter than I ever had walking into it. The same feeling repeated itself with every home, every property I sold. Each one had been a fortress of success, yet also a prison of responsibility. Each sale was another key turned, another door opening toward freedom. People often confuse ownership with security. We think that by owning more, we're protecting ourselves, building a fortress against uncertainty. But what I discovered was the opposite. Ownership can actually limit you. It ties you down, roots you in place, makes you less free to change, to move, to adapt. When I reduced my life to the essentials, I felt a flexibility I hadn't known before. If I wanted to move tomorrow, I could. If I wanted to spend a month focusing only on music, nothing tied me down. If I wanted to disappear into quiet places with my wife, I could do that without worrying about empty mansions waiting for me. I began to see possessions for what they truly are. Anchors. Some are necessary. They keep you grounded, give you stability. But too many, and you stop moving altogether. You stop living freely. This shift didn't just affect how I lived, it changed how I saw the world. Suddenly, I noticed how much time people spend chasing ownership. Bigger houses, newer cars, more clothes, endless collections of things. And yet, when you look closely, those things rarely bring more joy. They bring more stress, more responsibility, more distraction. I thought about my fans. So many of them work tirelessly, saving for things they believe will make them happy. And while I would never tell anyone not to enjoy the fruits of their labor, I wish they could see what I've learned. Happiness doesn't come from owning more. It comes from living more. Owning is finite. Living is infinite. And this lesson has reshaped everything. Even the way I travel feels different now. Before, I would book the most luxurious hotels, carry far more luggage than I needed, surround myself with the comforts of ownership. Now, I travel light. A few clothes, the tools I need to create music, and that's it. And strangely, those trips feel richer, more vibrant, because I'm not weighed down. I'm free to experience fully without worrying about the things I've carried with me. Marriage has deepened this truth. With my wife beside me, I've learned that it's not the setting that makes a memory, it's the presence. We don't need a mansion to share laughter. We don't need a chandelier to share dinner. We don't need luxury to feel love. What we need is time. What we need is space, not physical, but emotional, to connect, to be, to grow. That's what possessions had been stealing from me all along. Not money, not energy, but space, the space to live, to love, to experience. And so letting them go wasn't a sacrifice, it was a return to what had always mattered most. Now, when I think of wealth, I don't think of houses or cars. I think of moments. The moment I hear a melody come to life in the studio, the moment I stand on stage and hear thousands of voices singing with me, the moment I sit with my wife in a quiet room, sharing stories no one else will ever hear. Those are the treasures I want to collect. And the best part is they don't need storage, they don't need insurance, they don't weigh me down. They live in my heart, and they travel with me wherever I go. So when people ask me about selling my houses, my belongings, my possessions, I tell them this: I didn't lose anything. I gained everything. I gained clarity. I gained freedom. I gained the ability to truly live, not just own. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: ownership and experience are not the same. Don't confuse the two. One ties you down, the other sets you free. What surprised me most about this journey wasn't the emptiness of my closets, or the silence of rooms once filled with possessions. What surprised me most was how deeply it transformed my inner world, my happiness, my health, my presence, my ability to love and be loved. For so long, I had believed that happiness was tied to progress, and progress was tied to accumulation. If I kept adding more and more awards, more shows, more things, then surely happiness would grow with it. But in reality, the more I added, the less I felt. Every new thing dulled faster than the last. Every possession became another responsibility, another weight I carried silently. When I let them go, something unexpected happened. Happiness began to return, not in grand bursts, but in quiet, steady waves. I noticed it first in the mornings. Before, I would wake up already tense, my mind racing with tasks, obligations, and the invisible weight of everything I had to maintain. But once my life was simplified, I woke up differently. The air felt lighter. My breathing felt deeper. There was space in my thoughts. I could drink my morning coffee slowly, actually tasting it, instead of rushing past it on my way to the next demand. Sleep improved too, not because I bought a better mattress, but because my mind was unburdened. Without the constant hum of possessions whispering for attention, I drifted to rest more easily. Nights that had once been restless became calm, filled with dreams instead of worries. Health followed. For years, I had pushed my body to extremes, sleepless nights, endless rehearsals, energy spent faster than I could replenish it. Stress had become my normal state, but as my life grew lighter, so did my body. I exercised not to prove something, but to feel alive. I ate not to fuel the next schedule, but to nourish myself. The clarity I found in my environment translated into clarity in my health, and perhaps most importantly, presence returned. When I was buried in possessions, I was never fully in the moment. Even when sitting across from someone I loved, part of me was elsewhere, managing things in my mind, thinking about what needed care, what needed payment, what needed protection. But now, with so little to manage, I was there, fully there. With my wife, I could listen deeply, laugh freely, hold her hand without my mind drifting away. With my friends, I could share conversations without distraction. With my fans, I could step on stage and give my whole self, not just the part that wasn't buried under possessions. It was as though my soul had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to finally let go of what didn't matter so I could return to what did. Of course, there were moments of doubt. There always are. Society doesn't applaud letting go, it applauds acquiring. And there were times when I wondered if people would misunderstand me, if they would see this choice as weakness instead of strength. But then I would return to the silence of my uncluttered home, the calm of my unburdened mind, the love I felt flowing more freely than ever, and I knew this was the right path. Because happiness, I learned, isn't found in abundance, it's found in alignment. Alignment between what you value and how you live. Alignment between your heart and your actions. Alignment between who you are and what surrounds you. When my environment reflected this alignment, everything else fell into place. My marriage grew stronger. My music grew more authentic. My health improved. My presence deepened. This journey also taught me something profound about love. Love doesn't need possessions to grow. In fact, possessions often crowd it out, leaving little space for connection. But when you clear the clutter, love expands. It fills the space you've created. It breathes. It thrives. One night, I remember sitting with my wife on the floor of our nearly empty living room. There was no furniture, no decorations, no distractions. Just us, a blanket, and the quiet hum of the city outside. We talked for hours, laughed until our stomachs hurt, shared stories we had never told each other before. And in that moment, I realized this is happiness. This is wealth. This is everything. It wasn't in the house itself. It wasn't in the things we had or didn't have. It was in the freedom to be fully present with the person I love most. And so when people ask me if I miss my old life, if I miss the mansions and the collections and the endless stream of things, my answer is simple: no. Because what I have now is far greater. I have time. I have clarity. I have love. I have freedom. And in needing less, I've found more than I ever thought possible. Looking back now, it feels almost surreal. The boy who once dreamed of success by picturing mansions and luxury cars has become the man who found true success by letting them all go. The journey has been humbling, emotional, and at times deeply uncomfortable. But more than anything, it has been liberating. I often ask myself, if I could go back in time, what would I tell my younger self? The one who worked tirelessly, fueled by ambition and the desire to prove himself. I think I would tell him this: true wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you can live without. Freedom doesn't come from acquiring everything you want. It comes from needing very little. And happiness doesn't come from surrounding yourself with things, but from surrounding yourself with love, purpose, and presence. If I had known that sooner, maybe I would have chosen differently earlier. But I also know that every step of my journey, even the ones that led me to clutter and excess, brought me here. And for that, I am grateful. Marriage was the turning point. Standing beside someone you've promised to share your life with has a way of stripping away illusions. You begin to see clearly what matters and what doesn't. And for me, it became obvious that what mattered was not the number of houses I owned, but the love we shared inside any space we chose to call home. It wasn't the luxury of my closet, but the warmth of holding hands across a kitchen table. It wasn't the price of a car, but the joy of singing together in traffic with the windows down. It wasn't the watch on my wrist, but the time I was truly present that defined the quality of my life. When I sold my belongings, I didn't lose anything. I gained freedom. The freedom to think more clearly, the freedom to move more lightly, the freedom to love more deeply, and the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose how I live, instead of being controlled by what I own. This journey has made me reflect on the culture we live in. Everywhere we turn, the world tells us to want more. More space, more things, more options. But the truth is, more often becomes a trap. We end up maintaining collections we don't use, protecting things we don't love, and sacrificing time we can never get back. What if, instead, we asked ourselves one simple question? If I didn't already own this, would I choose to bring it into my life today? That question has the power to change everything. It forces us to see clearly what adds value and what doesn't. It cuts through the noise of marketing, comparison, and habit, and reveals what truly matters. I don't believe everyone needs to sell everything, as I did. That's not the point. The point is to live intentionally, to choose consciously, to surround yourself only with what supports the life you truly want, not the life the world tells you to want. For some, that might mean keeping certain possessions that bring daily joy or genuine purpose. For others, it might mean simplifying drastically. The path is personal, but the principle remains. Freedom comes not from more, but from less. And if my story can inspire even one person to pause, to question, to release what no longer serves them, then sharing it is worth it.